Mediopolis, Chapter 18. The older man, Mr. Seeking, had been sat there in his room, still doing his research on the mountain beliefs, the mountain people, mountain theologies, and mountain psychologies too, in preparation and anticipation perhaps of going on a mountain pilgrimage, something he'd thought about and wanted to do for a long time, though he still had a lot of research to do for it. He'd been combining many of his notes, comparing and contrasting different research on all the information, trying to collate it all together. Strangely, many mountain dwellers, he'd felt from the research, had left their world in search of man-made worlds, had abandoned the mountains gradually over long periods of time, a steady flow of people leaving and abandoning the mountains, looking for the world of men, looking for man-made worlds, where there could be more convenient local amenities, to live closer to their fellow man, in larger numbers with them. Was it to escape the remoteness or the restricting conditions of the mountains that could be and were sometimes harsher than that of other lands, or desiring to learn and know much more and to work and play much more with one's fellow man, who could be entertained and could dwell in much larger numbers in other lands, to strive and suffer, to have fun and pleasure in the world of man, but not nature and not the mountains. People had worried the older man was still researching the mountains from afar and for so long. The mother, on visiting him, had heard many of the mountain rambles and seen many of the mountain stories, the mountain films, heard so many of his mountain talks from the other mountaineers he'd often met over the years. Very few were his own, really, but she felt she could picture him there, even though he was younger at the time, and the mountains always sounded much gianter than they really were. But she'd heard so much about it, she was concerned. Perhaps he was just going on about it as a distraction from his own life or his own world. She and the other family, the older son that was a student studying similar subjects to the man, were both worried about him, though, because he spent so long researching those mountain beliefs. But why was he planning on going there? Or was he really still researching the mountains from afar, from a great distance? That around and at the mountains, he and others could be more vulnerable there, perhaps. The older man had not said that, though, to the mother or the others, his concerns for that. But what would he be more vulnerable to in a mountainous region? He thought from the research notes, perhaps just more vulnerable to something supernatural, because more supernatural claims tended to happen there, whether one believed those things or not, of course. Otherworldly beings and claims of all manner of different things unknown that were claimed to have happened there, perhaps. Many more incidents were claimed to happen in those mountainous regions than in other places that he found from the research notes. Would he be more exposed to God or gods or angels or demons or spirits or ghosts, or who knows what kind of entity? Could he be more exposed to those kind of things? Perhaps. Perhaps he would be less exposed, however, to human beliefs in such a inhospitable, remote location, such as the mountains often were. He would be less exposed perhaps to the human beliefs, being away from the human areas, from human civilizations and larger numbers of human societies. Well, that's what a consensus of many of the claims from the research seemed to lead him to think, from a wealth of the testimonies that he'd read through so far, whether they were an accurate guide or not, whether they were all stories and somewhat exaggerated or mistaken in some places, but how could they all be? As if the mountain, or something at, in, or around it, around or within the mountain perhaps, could somehow cause mass hallucinations or delusions. Well, it was possible that strange climatic conditions that were so different within mountain regions compared to other low-lying lands, that could perhaps produce some of the delusions, could explain some of the hallucinatory conditions and phenomena that may have happened. Many could be cases, the people that are very weary from long, difficult, challenging journeys, that could be very mentally tired or sensorially overwhelmed, in awe of the size and the spectacle of the mountains themselves, and of course, all of the elemental forces too, the sudden change in the amount of temperature that could change, and the amount of wind and rain and sun that one could be exposed to. All those factors could contribute too, as well as all the differing and strange sights that could be seen at those elevated higher levels too, that could be stunning and quite different, something that you would never really ordinarily encounter in a town, village or city, unless you were living upstairs and visited a variety of high-rise flats or skyscraping buildings on a regular basis, perhaps. But even that wouldn't be quite the same as the gradual slow climb of the mountain regions and its different slope gradients of the different mountains. All those spectacular sights that could really transform and dazzle the senses. Perhaps that led one to see something beyond that, some mirages. And of course the dazzling sounds and the smells, as well as those sights, that could be so different, so remote, so much more exotic, that could leave you feeling so strange. In a foreign land, it's possible that many things were mistaken also as something else other than what they were, simply because one just wasn't used to seeing those kind of things. Perhaps a UFO could just be a falling asteroid or shooting star, could even be an unknown kind of flying aircraft that one has never seen before nor recognizes as that. It could well be something not supernatural, something that is natural, of strange, unencountered animal, plant, mineral, vegetable, or just a person, perhaps. Perhaps in the dark of night, in the dim of twilight, when it's hard to see clearly what they are. In a foreign land, perhaps it's easy to make more mistakes, and those supernatural phenomenon reported by those mountaineer reports could well, a number of them at least, be mistaken. Perhaps all could be to some extent. With no known natural or rational causes. Also, many mountains have rolling mists as well. Some of them do, at least higher up in those climatic conditions. The rolling mists that can make it harder to perceive and observe things clearly. And the cloud cover too, that can come in so swiftly and cover such vast regions of mountains in certain climatic regions that can make also seeing things much harder too. And also, during the climb itself, that can be quite laborious, difficult, straining. And the descent as well as the climb can be as well, when one has to be so much more focused on the path, on its steep gradients, on the narrow cliff passes, on its many challengings, on its obstacles that may be confronted with the different mountaineers and animals one may meet, with being so close to the edge, with the different rocky edges, with the different potential avalanches of rocks that could move underfoot, with many different phenomenons that one is not used to, especially, that one may not be capable, because of all those things to focus on and take caution with, of really clearly studying any natural phenomenon that might occur, especially if it would occur suddenly and dramatically, without a time perhaps to prepare oneself, and when one is already in the midst of a challenge, of a climb, of an ascent, or of even simply talking to other mountaineers, of looking at maps and guides, of studying views, of discussing ascent or descent journeys. When one is perhaps already engaged in participating in the climb or the descent already, and a phenomenon occurs without announcing itself, then perhaps it's not easy to get a clear account of what's gone on. And when a relatively safer area is found and the mountaineers are resting, maybe eating, maybe discussing things, and maybe having the time where one is safer to rest and explore things easier, so that there are many more reasons then that one could look, but it may be that they don't always see the things at those times themselves, that they could be engaged in putting up the tent, in resting their bodies, in repairing themselves, in preparing the food to last for the night, putting up shelter, making sure members of the group, the mountaineers, are okay. There would be many things they could be engaged upon in the brief times that they would be resting in the small resting enclaves that they managed to find. Even looking out for the rest and making sure that it's safe and well maintained and making sure that it's put up okay could take a lot of time and energy too, to distract one away from whatever potential phenomenon, be it supernatural or natural, that may have occurred or be occurring within the region. It may be very difficult that one is always occupied with a variety of things, such could be the challenges that present themselves in such an unfamiliar place. Of course, seasoned, hardened, and experienced mountaineers may, of course, get used to those things, and they, of course, may be able to relax more and know when and how and why to relax. They may well be able to perceive things much easier in that condition. But that may not be true for all those that go up there, and especially if, even with experienced mountaineers, when unusual conditions may change, that it may be something that's even unfamiliar to them and that they need still to be focused on. Well, there are many reasons that could make it hard to give accurate accounts of all happenings during a mountain journey. So it's possible and likely that some of the reports of such supernatural occurrences are likely to be genuine mistaken, and that a number are just perhaps fictitious stories, exaggerations, or just entirely made up, just to tell a good story, to create some sort of legend of oneself or one's group, perhaps. Something to tell others, to get a good laugh, to provoke interest, to sell stories, to grab attention, of course. There was all those interests in it. One couldn't be too naive in looking at other people's views, and perhaps some were just genuinely mistaken and thought they'd seen things that were mistakes and were not what they really perceived. But many others may have exaggerated what they really had seen to add on to it, to make it more of an interesting story, perhaps. But who knew? Many mountaineers had reported all number of different visions and strange occurrences, sights and sounds and feelings and smells, and even strange thoughts and insights, even strange apparent beliefs that they'd never experienced before. Just too many, though. Too many had given strange reports for it all to be mistaken, unless, of course, there were reasons for those genuine mistakes that the older man had looked through. But he really didn't think such large numbers of people would all be making up those things completely, though. People that had a credible history of being relatively honest in the past and fairly accurate, according to others that knew them, and those people might seem fairly accurate as well. No, if they'd already seemed fairly accurate in other reports previously, no, we shouldn't just blindly reject what they're saying because it sounds so strange. It should still be investigated and looked into with an open mind, felt the older man. But we should neither accept blindly what those things are because they're so remote and we know so little about such foreign, distant places. All the strange legends, the myths, the rumours, the stories of those far-flung mountain regions. We should neither blindly accept nor reject them, the older man had been taught by the mountain teachers long ago, outlining and highlighting this note in his long list of notes for himself to remind himself. Neither should we reject or accept any claim he'd reread, going through his notes now, in preparation for the discussion when he would talk to the other students later. However outlandish some of those claims may seem, yet we should strive to give each story or claim a fair but firm hearing. Not easy, though, of course, when we're all learning how to be fairer. None of us has a monopoly on that itself, and that everyone is trying to learn, struggling to learn at times what that is, and what it means to be fairer to other people, and also how to be strong, determined, stoical in our beliefs, and what beliefs to be stoical, unbending, unyielding within, and what beliefs are strong and true that should be consistent and depended upon. Those things are difficult and a challenge for anyone to know, of course, and that we're all learning in how to be fairer and firmer with other people, so that a truer and more realistic trial that we are able to give to each other. To become as solid as the mountains, yet as giving as the fresh springs, as the mountain teacher had taught him long ago, saying that all had failed in the challenge and all still strove towards such goals. A challenge for anyone at any age and place, the mountain teacher had said long ago. Did people run away from the mountains or escape them simply to find other people or an easier way of life? Perhaps. Did people run away from other people, though, to escape them, simply to find the mountains or an easier way of life without being surrounded by so many people and human beliefs. What was more frightening, though, supposing many of the legends and myths, or some of the stories of the mountains, could be true and have some grains of truth to it at least, being under the influence of the natural environment, of each other's, of people and societies, or of their absences, however partial, and perhaps also under the influence of the elements too, of God or gods, angels or demons or spirits, ghosts or aliens, or other supernatural entities, if any such things existed, with perhaps even entities with no known names that were not fully known yet. Who knew? Certainly, there were things to be feared in both ideas. In both things, also perhaps to be desired and to be learned, things that one desired perhaps to know about both, as well as fearing and being concerned. Perhaps there were lessons to be learned from both the human world and perhaps another world, if such another world existed. And certainly from the mountainous world, there were things to be feared and desired to be learned from there too. It was more the mountainous world than the human world, at least, because they'd shaped it. That's what he'd been taught, that they had much more helped to shape it as it is. The movements of the mountains had even been more profound in the geological changes than any of the trees, animals, or even the people's changes had been. The questions remained as to what moved the mountains, really, of course. Why the mountains moved, how the mountains moved, when, where, and in what way those mountains moved. Those were the clear questions that the mountaineers had left the older man. And such vast amounts of different answers were there within the research, it was hard to know without direct personal experience himself, with such conflicting reports as to the how the mountains had moved so dramatically, and why, and where, and when. What made those mountains move, of course, was such a difficult answer that provoked so many differing answers from so many. Perhaps the answers can only really be found within the mountains themselves, perhaps by exploring and studying deeply within them, or by studying and exploring others that have done such studies themselves. Many men have made society their home now themselves, and not the mountains though, so perhaps we are all so distant from those mountains to know such things any more now. But now we are home in society, a man-made society, that may be great in many ways and have its good and bad. It may be fascinating and wonderful, full of wonderful, intriguing, curious societies. Yet the mountains had made the earth what it was. They had made the earth. They had played a significant role, a grander role, despite us not thinking about them so much because of our vast distance from them now. Some may say they were just sleeping giants in the mountains, or lost ancient worlds perhaps within it, buried long ago. Yet we will never know fully now the truth or the fables or the falsehoods or the mysteries of those mountains, unless one could travel to the heart of the matter, or meet others that have, and know others genuinely, that have travelled to the heart of the matter, and to travel within the mountains, to unravel their many mysteries that could be within. They say it's not the mountains that defeat us, but the small shoe in the stone. That, of course, one of the old sayings. And that you must visit the mountain teacher, who can never visit you.